Okay, so I just messed up the other live show in regards to this particular topic. Um, I'm going to try to make this short. I think I'm going to start working a lot more on the ethics side of things. Um, in Myers-Briggs, obviously, there's feeling, the feeling function. You have the feeling function of making decisions based off feeling is what it is labeled as in Myers-Briggs. Here's what I believe it's a misnomer for this particular reason. When you have the word feeling, it implies emotion. It doesn't necessarily mean emotion, it implies it. And this creates a challenge for people to accurately depict their own type, because they may think that they're acting emotionally and therefore they're a feeling-based person. That is not what Myers-Briggs is ultimately depicting, is that you make decisions off emotions or not emotions. Now, granted, values or ethics can elicit emotions, and hence they're very closely related. And whereas logic tends to become impartial to emotions. So this is where the challenge between, do you make decisions off emotions or do you make decisions off your ethics? Okay. So if you think about it, let's take some of the most ethical historical figures we can think of, or people that we considered very ethical. Were they emotional? Did someone make them mad and they made a really emotional decision? No. They made decisions off what they believed in. They were hardcore people, invigorated by their ethics. And so these people have become great leaders. It is often said that Martin Luther King was preferenced ENFJ. I wouldn't say that he was extremely, in the sense, emotional. Reacted off emotion. He reacted off what his core beliefs were, and elicit emotion, making him very passionate about what he's doing. But I think that the thing is that people who are entry to Myers-Briggs, especially at a young age, they don't have that enough emotional control to determine how they're actually making decisions. And I think this is where a lot of people are being challenged with Myers-Briggs, is because they well, I'm not really emotional. Okay, but that doesn't mean you don't make decisions off of values, or you do make decisions off of logic. And that's so you can get any type that is making it off of interpersonal or intrapersonal values, and that's gonna make it to where people are able to better determine their type. So example, I try to begin to, as I'm moving into more of introverted feeling and working on this aspect of my particular character, I'm trying to consider the ethical implications of my decisions, whereas I'm not so much focused on, oh, how does it make me feel? Okay, what emotions does it elicit? It's not really about emotions. Now, emotions are very tied to a lot of outcomes, so that then it becomes emotional. But how much control you have over your emotional environment, and I'm not saying shut your emotions off, but how much you can put your emotions aside to make either a very ethical choice or a very logical choice. And sometimes they align very well. So the most logical choice is also the most ethical choice. Or sometimes they don't align. The most logical choice seems to be the most anti-ethical choice. For example, the classic scenario of, you have a train going 100 miles per hour, and it has two ways to go, left or right. You're the operator of the switch. There on the left side, there's three people tied down to the track. On the right side, there's one person. Which side do you choose? And the logical choice is three. You choose to save the three, and then you destroy the life of one. That's typically to be the logical choice, wouldn't you say? Whereas other people may go, wow, that's a really tough scenario. That's challenging, because that one person may have a family where these other three people are just old people. And then you're starting to incorporate ethics when you get in decisions like that. Okay, so this becomes an ethical dilemma, and not so much a logical one once you start bringing in the human factor. So the human factor is what makes something ethical. Okay, so that's where the emotions often get tied in, because there's a human factors involved. And so people tend to mix the idea that introverted feeling or extroverted feeling is emotions, introverted emotions or extroverted emotions. And that's not the case. Like I said earlier, they're very, very closely related. So I think once we depict that, how you make those decisions, once you come about making those decisions, then, so let me just rephrase this. As an ENTJ, as one that's working on developing, what would have come naturally to me in that ethical dilemma is instantly choose the death of the one. Okay, I wouldn't have naturally even considered, oh my, what do I do? Now, granted, I would try to find a way to stop the train before it went either way. But if I were left with no choice, which as in it has to go one way or the other, and there's nothing I could do about it, I would say ultimately it would be a split-second decision. I'd choose the one person to die over the three without considering the human factor. Okay. Now, if I'm posed with a question like this, which is to invoke thought, I can bring out my ethical decision-making process and go, okay, what would I really do? What would I really think about this? And that's I think that's where people are confused about Myers-Briggs. It's like, okay, how do I make decisions? What are the ethical factors involved in making this kind of decision? Is that decision right? So the correctness in this situation is not, is it logically consistent? Is it logically right? Is it ethically consistent? Or is it ethically right in comparison with my own values or the values of the world around me? That's where the introverted and extroverted feeling, aka ethics, actually come from. Okay, so if you don't like the word ethics, this is all semantics. It could be morals. It could be whatever you want to call it. Okay, I'm going to call it ethics. Okay, and I think Socionics calls it ethics too. So keep that in mind, that when you're trying to determine if you are a feeling preference person or a thinking preference person, is what decision comes to your mind first? What process comes to your mind first? And as I've grown older, I've really been taking the time to process how it affects my internal ethics code. And here's where the introverted feeling ethics clash comes in with itself, and why these people who have introverted feeling can often be in great distress. And I think it's because it really does root into this, well, especially inferior or tertiary introverted feeling, is because it's this large removal from what is ethical and what is not, and this lack of cognition of my ethics code is very sophisticated, yet it's so unconscious. It's hard for me to even, trudge my way to determine, what is most ethical and what is not in this case. So if you're struggling like between say INTP or INFP, and you're doing the dichotomy based method of typing yourself, make sure you don't put emotions into the picture. Okay, because when I was a teenager, I was very emotional. I made very emotional decisions, and they weren't always logical. They were irrational. They were emotional. They were based on what would make me feel. Like it was almost hedonistic in its own right. The kind of the life that I chose to live is what would make me feel the best. What would make me the most, very utilitarian point of view is what would make me the most happy. What would bring me the most happiness in that moment. And it was not so much logical. It was very emotionally based. And as I grew up and I got a little more mature, can't say that I'm totally mature, but as I've grown up and gotten a little more mature, I've realized that, underneath all the emotional dilemma and all the emotional stress that I experienced, that the preference I actually had was logic. And it's always been logic, and everybody's known that. I just didn't know it because I was so masked with my own emotions. I reflected and go, wow, maybe I'm actually a feeling preference person. And before I understood that feeling was based on values. And I was always skirting the line on my values, not because I said, I have choice left. Here's my logical choice, logical outcomes, and choice, and then path B, which is my ethical choices, ethical outcomes. I never did that. I just instantly reacted on what was the most logical. Or at the time when I was a teenager, I acted on what was most emotional, what made me feel happier or made me feel more loved, or whatever I was pursuing at the time. And it wasn't necessarily logical. Underneath it, I could feel the logic calculating, okay, if I did this, here's what the result's going to be. Here's pros, cons. I would do that underneath, but I always made the decision based on what was emotional. And to me, when you're making decisions and not having control of your emotional atmosphere, it's a lack of maturity and experience and ability for you to be able to do that. So, and I'm not saying be like me where you just shut your emotions off. That's also can be seen as a sense of immaturity. You have to have a comfortability with your emotions and understand how they impact you. And I think that's where I was challenged as a teenager. And and it's not perfect, but it's very it's in under development. Let me just put it that way. So as far as the ethical code in itself, okay. So as far as the dilemma that we all experience when it comes to, hey, you know, I've got a value preference. I've got value-based decisions I want to make. I want to improve my values. One thing that's really helped me get in touch with my values is, believe it or not, it's actually a school courses that have classes in philosophy that I get very, very interested in. And primarily ethics, business ethics, or regular ethics, or intro to ethics, anything like that. And I'm a big fan of philosophy because it helps extract a lot of exploration of ethics. And you'll see some great philosophers out there who touch base or dive deep into the whole topic of ethics, which I think if you bring ethics into awareness, so if you're a thinking preference like me and you study philosophy, it really helps you dive into the ethical side of your inferior function or tertiary function. Say that you're a ENTP. It helps you dive into those ethical side and start creating awareness, because it is a statistic that if you rehearse ethical decisions and anticipate and rehearse them and practice them, it becomes more natural and habitual for you to actually act on them. And I think both logic and ethics are very equally interchangeable. And I say that, and they're both very beneficial. Okay. So it's not like, hey, you know, if you have a logic preference, and I hate the word thinking and feeling, because thinking makes it sound like I'm a thinker. And if you're a feeler, you're not a thinker. And that's not right either. So I'm just going to say logic versus ethics. Okay. So see, that makes a lot more sense to me. So introverted logic, extroverted logic, that sounds like all that. So I just want to make sure that we're clearing that up, that if you're F preference, it doesn't mean that you are not a thinker, or vice versa. And again, you know, when you're determining your type, what decision comes to mind first? Is it the ethical scenario that comes to perspective first? When you're making a decision, do you consider human factors first? You know, do you consider, you know, and again, this is not completely mutually exclusive from logic either, because you can look at logical factors such as, I can kill this person or kill this person, but this person has, you know, 1 hour of life left anyway, because they're a victim of cancer. And this person over here has, you know, 30 hours of life left, and, you know, 30 years of life left. So should I kill the person that's going to die anyway first? Well, it sounds a little more logical, but again, these are very interchangeable in the sense of they're not mutually exclusive, because there are human factors involved in logical decisions as well. So they both need each other. So you can't completely use logic without the consideration of ethics involved. And if you don't, then you're making a very irrational and misinformed choice between the two. And so I think that's critical when it's becoming to making decisions, and the clash between, you know, hey, I make emotional decisions, which I think emotional decisions are very unreliable. I think ethical based decisions are very reliable. And remember that MBTI, specifically Carl Jung, named these irrational and rational functions. So irrational and rational functions. And both ethics and logic are both rational functions, and not implying that, you know, your emotions are typically irrational. They don't have necessarily a reason for their state of being. They don't have reason, whereas ethics has reason. It's rooted in some kind of framework. And I think that's the complexity of it all. So, you know, the thing that really invoked this conversation, and I'm going to end this little brief memo with this, is that there's a particular guy that I was talking to last night that really, you know, brought this to perspective for me. I mean, I've already known this particular topic, but, you know, understanding what his pursuits were, and understanding what he was looking at doing, and how he explored his own ethical code and created his life philosophy around what his own ethics are, has developed that particular function in his personality, and he's rooted it and interchanged that ethical code with his own internal logical framework. And it signifies somebody who has done the right thing and has helped them, or continues to do the right thing. Not rather that they're not finished with that process, but they're exploring and developing that part, so that their logic function and ethical functions both coincide with each other. So that's an example of someone who's an example of someone who's exploring and developing the tertiary or inferior functions of their personality. So I suggest for people who do have inferior or tertiary ethical issues, as in they don't make decisions consciously with ethics, to explore philosophy and help dive into, you know, things that make you bring your own ethics into awareness. So once you understand that, you can start mapping and rehearsing ethical dilemmas that you may run into, whether it's in your professional life or personal life. And whereas I think dominant and auxiliary ethical people, as in they make their decisions primarily with ethics, I think they could also benefit from this. And because it doesn't imply a dominant function or auxiliary function, it implies that you're very good at making ethical decisions. It just means that's what's most natural. So that's what comes up most naturally to you, and it doesn't imply a strength or weakness. It implies that, you know, you make ethical decisions, but it could be very misinformed as well. So keep that in mind when you're struggling between this, and hopefully you guys who have not identified with a type, this video does help you sort out the difference between emotions and ethics. And so when you're thinking of introverted or extroverted ethics, or rather introverted or extroverted feeling, just think of it in the sense of ethics or morality. Okay. Anyway, hope that helps. We'll see y'all soon. Thanks.